Hello, good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm David Rousseau of the Kaiser Family Foundation, or KFF, where I oversee journalism and digital communications. On behalf of my terrific colleagues on the Media Impact Funders Board, which I'm privileged to chair, and its amazing staff who organize this and all our programs, I'd like to welcome you to this installment of our 2021 Media Impact Forum. Thanks so much for joining us today. My day job at KFF is working at the intersection of health policy and media. So as you might imagine, I'm thrilled to be introducing today's program to discuss innovative philanthropic efforts to build vaccine confidence in communities of color and to learn from our fantastic group of panelists and from all of you. As you all know, and as we'll all be hearing about in more detail today, the pandemic has highlighted and in some cases worsened so many structural inequities in our healthcare system. And at KFF, through our policy analysis, polling, journalism, and social impact media, we've been focused on highlighting these inequities and exploring approaches to lessening their impact. We've been fortunate to work with many funding partners in this work, including with the Colorado Health Foundation, who are a major partner of ours in helping to strengthen health journalism in Colorado, and whose president and CEO, Karen McNeil-Miller, and communications director, Taryn Ford, are joining us today to discuss the innovative activities they have been supporting there during the pandemic. I'd also like to mention a new initiative KFF recently launched with the Black Coalition on COVID, Dr. Rhea Boyd, and W. Kamau Bell, called The Conversation Between Us About Us, which is a new campaign by Black healthcare workers for Black people about COVID-19 vaccines that has many other partners, including YouTube, and all of which you can learn more about at betweenusaboutus.org. If anyone is interested in working with us to create new video content featuring Black doctors and nurses from your community, or to help get these great videos more widely disseminated throughout your community, I'd love to hear from you. But for now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our host and moderator today, Dr. Kara James. Kara is one of the leading thinkers and doers in the field of health disparities, and we're fortunate to have her with us today. She's the former director of the Office of Minority Health at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, where she led efforts to reduce disparities and achieve health equity for vulnerable populations. And Kara is one of the few people I know who served effectively at that senior level in both the Obama and Trump administrations. She's now the president and CEO of Grantmakers in Health, where I get to work with her as one of her board members. And she's also a former colleague of mine at KFF and a good friend. Thank you for being here today, Kara. But before I hand it off to you, I'd like to mention that we have closed captioning available. And if you'd like to enable it, you should be able to click on the CC button in Zoom, which can sometimes be found in the More button. But for now, thanks for joining us today, and take it away, Kara.
Thank you so much, David, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone. It is my pleasure to be here on behalf of Grantmakers in Health and to be partnering with Media Impact Funders on this really important conversation today. I think David really did a good job highlighting why it is so important that we're talking about this issue. And from our perspective at Grantmakers in Health, we know the importance of clear, concise, accurate information getting to communities in a language that they prefer is really important in helping address a lot of the health inequities that we see. And so we're just thrilled to be part of this conversation and to be joined by many of our colleagues here today and a number of our funding partners who are here with us. So our agenda today is really a really exciting one. We have 4 presentations that we're going to go through, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And so you can enter your questions into the Q&A, which you will find down at the bottom. And if you have other comments or need some assistance, you can put that into the chat box. And without further ado, I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Dr. George Mensah, who is the director of the Center for Translation Research and Implementation Science at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at the National Institutes for Health. Dr. Mensah's career spans more than 20 years in public health service between the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and NIH. And we are so grateful to have him today to talk to us about some of the issues that we're seeing in communities of color. Dr. Mensah?
Thank you very much, Dr. James. I'm going to try to share my screen now. I know we have quite a bit to go through, but let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude for including the NIH in this effort. I'm here representing an NIH-wide program that we call SEAL, is the Community Engagement Alliance Against COVID-19 Disparities, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here. This first slide really points to what David mentioned in the introduction. These are the huge and disproportionate impact that COVID has had in American Indian and Alaska Native communities, in Black and African American communities, and then Hispanic or Latino communities. When you look at hospitalizations for COVID, almost a fourfold greater impact in Blacks and African Americans, Hispanics, Latinos, American Indians, and even for deaths, almost a 2 to 3-fold greater impact. The reason why we're also focusing on these communities is also, this is where vaccine hesitancy tends to be more common. But we have to emphasize right at the beginning, hesitancy is not unique to these communities. Hesitancy is common, it's not a new phenomenon, but it tends to be more common in the communities that are also disproportionately impacted. What we're talking about in hesitancy is this area covered in the red box. Now, when you ask the question, if the vaccine is available to you today, would you take it? In the green box, the part of the population that is ready, sleeves rolled up, they want to get the vaccine right now. We should thank them and make sure that they share their testimonials, their experiences with their family, their friends, and the community. And then to the right here in red is the very small proportion of individuals who say they won't take it, no matter what you tell them. And even in this group, we should not forget about them, because as we share trusted information with them, we may convert some of them into the hesitant group and eventually into the acceptance group. But this is where we have the huge opportunity, and I'll tell you why in a minute. This next slide helps me a lot really appreciate it. Here is the very small proportion of the population that would definitely not get the vaccine, 15 to 20%, no matter where you look. Here are those who are ready and they want the vaccine. This is where we also find some differences, almost a 2-fold greater likelihood that white Americans would accept the vaccine, and you have 26 to 20% in Black and Hispanic who are ready and would take it now. But this is the huge segment in the middle where our responsibility is to make sure we can share appropriate information with them, clear, concise, convincing, and compelling communications so that we move them into the green side. Now, if you look in the black bar in the middle here, it's almost 62%, about a third. But as I mentioned, the Black and Hispanic communities are not the only ones who have vaccine hesitancy. About 43% in whites also have hesitancy, and we have to make sure we keep that in mind. Now, there are very good and legitimate reasons why people are hesitant when it comes to taking the vaccine. Some people have concerns and questions about the benefits, the safety and side effects of the vaccines. Others have been very concerned about the speed with which the vaccine was developed and whether any corners were cut. They also want to find out if people like me, if people like themselves, participated in the vaccine research. But the two big ones I've highlighted here is the widespread misinformation and the deep distrust, whether it's in the political system or the economic motivations of the government or the companies involved. It's still distrust, and this is what we really must do our best to address. An important part of the distrust also is past research misdeeds that have sown seeds of distrust. Now, in the next several slides, I'm going to show you some examples of why that's important, why we have to acknowledge that there are legitimate reasons for people to be concerned. Because we have very little time, I'm going to be brief. I won't go over the studies, but I'm pointing them out here so that you know they are in the slides. The references and the source for more detail is always given in the slide. So for African Americans, the two concrete examples we hear about is the Tuskegee syphilis study and the Henrietta Lacks research ethical misdeeds involving Johns Hopkins Hospital, Tuskegee involved in the CDC and the US public health system. For Hispanic and Latino communities, there are also egregious examples of ethical inappropriate research in Guatemala, also in Puerto Rico, when you look at research with sexually transmitted diseases in Guatemala and forced sterilizations in Puerto Rico. If you look in the American Indian and Alaska Native communities, we also have some very good examples that really have led to distrust. But it's important to acknowledge these, but we shouldn't stop there. We should always do our best to communicate that now there are rules, there are policies, and there are public laws that prevent these events from happening today. That may provide some reassurance, and it's really important for us to reflect that. Let me summarize by saying that because of all of this, we have to understand that there is no one-size approach that would fit all communities. So if you're talking about clear, concise, compelling communications, we must begin by listening to the community, their needs, and the basis for their concern and basis for hesitancy. Once we know that, then we can tailor our messages to the individual or contextualize it to the community. No single intervention strategy addresses all instances of hesitancy. That's the reason to tailor. Now, there are 3 C's when it comes to this effort. We must understand the community's level of confidence and try to boost their confidence. We must understand the issues around complacency, whether they think the COVID disease is not even real or not, what misinformation exists so that we can address that, and certainly convenience. We must make sure that at the end of our messages, we also point them to where they can get the vaccine and make sure we make them convenient. There is some good news, and this is shown in this compilation of survey information. I'm showing you data from the Kaiser Family Foundation COVID-19 vaccine monitor data from September last year, December last year, and then this third one is from the NPR PBS NewsHour Marist survey. If you take a look at the trends together, this is for the total population, not segmented by race or ethnicity. You see, it was really low, around 60-65% back in September, rose to about 70%, and in the most recent survey in March, still under 70%. So it's hovered around 70%. Those who say yes, they're ready. The vaccine is made available, they will get it. But that also means that about 30%, and that's also hovered, went down a little bit and back up. But we need to get our messages out so we can address it. If you look in the Hispanic population, fairly similar to what you see in the overall trend for the total population. Down around 60% in September, went up to about 70% in December, and the most recent data is down to still around 60%. But this is where we should all see as really good news, suggesting that whatever we've been doing is working and we need to do more in all populations, but particularly in the Black and African American community. Back in September, almost half of the population said there's no way they'll get the vaccine if it was available to them. And the other half said they would get it. But you see what happened in December, went up from 50% to 60%, and is now over 70%. So please don't let anyone tell you that African Americans don't want the vaccine. They may want to wait and see. They're hesitant for very good reasons, but it's our job to convince, to provide trusted information, use trusted messengers, and get the trusted messages across. So I'll finish off by saying we've learned quite a bit, even in just the last 6 months, about how to sharpen our communication strategies. But we must begin with accurate, trustworthy sources. And as Dr. James said, we use clear, concise, consistent, compelling language, and always deliver trustworthy messaging. If we have frequently answered questions, making them widely available really helps. But at the end of the day, it's trust that is key. And we do that by acknowledging the fears and concerns they have, and then being transparent about what we know to be truthful, and definitely always partnering with trusted leaders in the community. Here is our website for additional information that I've not been able to share with you because we want to be brief so we can get to your questions. And it's covid19community.nih.gov. And several different pieces of information that would support your work, information on ensuring inclusion, trusted information about vaccines, understanding some of the clinical trials and policies that have been put in place to protect individuals who participate, and certainly all about COVID and the vaccine basics. And finally, there are many different formats and channels that are available, including tip sheets, videos, infographics, but all of these are available to our site. Let me end by saying the takeaway message is this: vaccine hesitancy is nothing new. We've known about it for years. With every vaccine we've had, vaccines for adults and vaccines for children. But we know that hesitancy can change, but it requires community engagement. It requires building trust, understanding the vaccine process so we can answer questions, and always, always, always sharing truthful information. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mensah, for that great overview. I think it was a lot of really helpful information, particularly to see how things have changed over time. And next, we're going to take it down a level and get to a great presentation about the Vaccine Confidence and Equitable Uptake and Strategic Communications Outreach Project. And I just want to remind people, if you have questions for Dr. Mensah or any of the speakers as we are going along, to please feel free to put those into the Q&A, and we will get to those as we do the question and answer session at the end. So our next two presenters are Dr. Karen McNeil Miller, who is the president and CEO of the Colorado Health Foundation. And she joined the foundation 6 years ago after 10 years as the president of the Kate E. Reynolds Charitable Trust and 16 years with the Center for Creative Leadership. She'll be joined by her colleague, Taryn Fort, who is the Senior Director of Communications and External Influence, also at the foundation. And she leads the communications team and is also responsible for developing and managing relationships that help advance organizational influence through strategic executive engagement and community engagement, including programming that advances the nonprofit executive leadership sector. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the two of them and welcome you to the discussion.
Thank you so much. I am going to take a moment here to share my screen with everyone. Just make sure everybody can see. Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much to Dr. James and to Media Impact Funders for having us share a little bit about what we're doing at the Colorado Health Foundation in Denver. So I am just gonna also give a shout out to Dr. Mensah because the lead-in that you provided in the overview was really helpful. I don't really need to articulate at all about what we're solving for because the disparities that we're seeing in communities of color in Colorado are the same ones that he just talked about. You'll see here on the slide just a handful of headlines that I pulled down from just the last few weeks that certainly illustrate the challenges that we're working against. And want to just share with everyone that the Colorado Health Foundation, for those of you who might not be as familiar with us, we are a statewide private foundation. And we, of course, are a grant maker and do about $100 million worth of grants across the state annually. We also invest heavily in policy advocacy, different types of capacity building across the communities in Colorado. We do lots of different types of strategic communications as well, lots of convening. And we also have a research portfolio that we stood up in the past 3 years that's focused on public perceptions. And maybe uniquely for us as a funder, this research portfolio actually sits between the policy and communications departments internally at our foundation. And this portfolio includes a few different types of research, but I'm just going to talk briefly about two of them that are relevant to the work that we're doing right now around equitable vaccine uptake. So one form of research is public opinion polling, which everyone on the call is familiar with. We do have an annual poll that we put out into the field in the summer. And last year in 2020, we also partnered on a secondary poll that was specific to COVID. These polls in particular were really important for helping us to confirm early in the year and early in the pandemic that we were likely going to see the hesitancy rates that we are seeing among the BIPOC communities in Colorado. So, and I have to give KFF and David a quick shout out because Kaiser Family Foundation really helped us kind of learn the art and science of public opinion polling back in 2018. So thank you for that. I also just want to talk a little bit about a second type of research that really is the heart of this work that we're talking about today. And we really think about this as deeper ethnographic messaging research. We put this portfolio together in looking at the different types of movements across the country that have led to successful policy change. So for example, the gay marriage movement is something that we looked at as a model. And last year when we began to really affirm that we might be seeing hesitancy when the vaccine became available in the communities that we serve, we decided to take that type of messaging research engine and think about how we could learn about what it might take to motivate these communities to get vaccinated when the time came. So this is probably the most important slide I'll share today because this is kind of the strategic overview of what we're doing at the moment around equitable vaccine uptake. So as I mentioned, public opinion polling started affirming things for us early last year. So last fall, we decided to get the wheels moving on a messaging research and development project. And just for the detail behind this, since I know we've got funders on the call, the way that we started this was by setting up an advisory committee. This advisory committee is not just advising us on how to engage with different groups and put them into focus groups and things of that nature. It's actually been incredibly important for the success of the work we've done so far because it's multi-sector in terms of the composition, and it's really helped us keep a good handle on all the different public education efforts that are happening across the state and coordinate as needed, and that continues to be a need. When it came to actually starting and kicking off the research, we started with landscape scans. So we wanted to understand the rhetorical landscape that we were dealing with, did media scans. We convened funders from all over the country to understand the different types of engagement that they were going to be doing. And from there, we began developing profile mindsets, which are essentially typologies. This is where we start mapping out different types of messaging that we think might work with these specific racial groups. We also start to look at different messengers that we might want to try out. And then from there, we move into message testing. This is where the project sits currently right now. So we are not finished with this work. We have a few steps to take yet. Unlike I think the Ad Council is already out in the field, so it'll be great to hear from them about how it's happening on the ground, how it's working on the ground. But as we think about the message testing experience that we're having right now, we've been doing racial focus groups. We're also in the midst of doing Spanish focus groups. When we finish that, then we will move into the stage where we actually design these evidence-based communications and really think about how to get them into the hands of those most trusted messengers. If you take a look at this slide, the right side of the slide, this distribution ecosystem is incredibly important for the success of the work because there's no point in doing the research unless we distribute it effectively. In an effort like this, you might think that we would sort of enlist a mass media campaign to try to get these messages out. But what we're learning is that we're going to have to instead really use a hyper-targeted communications deployment approach. So we make sure that we're reaching those trusted community leaders, those trusted healthcare providers that folks know and are providing culturally appropriate care. Trusted media entities also are going to be a piece of that. And so when the time comes that we're engaging those folks, we'll be providing them with technical assistance. We'll be providing them with all the tools that they need to use this communication effectively. The other thing I want to highlight is just this more systemic issue that Dr. Mensah talked about a little bit around just general vaccine access, which is obviously a huge barrier in general. And so the other things that we're doing inside the house at our foundation are we're funding access to vaccines in all kinds of different ways. We're looking at the safety net. We're looking at health fairs, all different ways that folks are engaging in the community to get vaccines. But we're also using policy influence to engage with policymakers, talking with the governor's office. For example, we recently just shared some of our research findings with the governor's office because In Colorado on Friday, they announced that everyone aged 16 and up will be eligible for the vaccine on April 15th. So we've got a timestamp to deal with here. I'm going to talk just for a minute about the media ecosystem, since this is media impact funders. And the way that we're going to engage with the media ecosystem in Colorado with this is a little different than what we usually do. So we're really lucky in Colorado that we have some centralized statewide media entities that function like networks for our media ecosystem, among many other things. So Colorado Media Project and CoLab are two of those networks that we've been engaging with to just try to think about how can we, work with their networks to share information about what we're finding. When I talk just in a minute about some of the findings, they very much align with what Dr. Mensah shared. But there's so much disinformation and lack of understanding around what to trust that we know that the media can play a role in helping to support that. But we know that the media who are most trusted by these racial groups are going to be the ones that are going to be the most effective. And so that's where things get a little different for us. We might, in one case, fund sort of, a larger statewide media entity. In this case, we're actually recognizing through our message work that we're going to have to be connecting with those groups that are really localized and trusted. So a community center newsletter, for example, might be one of those media entities that we engage with. We're working with Colorado Media Project, who is standing up a funding opportunity that will focus on informed reporting around the specific needs that I've just talked about. And we are considering being a funder, but we're also going to be able to partner with them to engage with all of those different grantees, the journalists that they're engaged with, to share information about what we're learning through the research to help combat some of this disinformation, help lift up those narratives around the disparities, the why behind it. And then we're also working to provide access to a story bank that will be stemming from the research process itself. So that we'll be able to share folks with the reporters directly who can be featured in the stories. This is my last slide. I share it with a caveat because we're still in the research learning process. There's more to come, but this is what we know right now. So in terms of detail, again, this is very much overlap with what Dr. Mensah shared, but I'll just emphasize a few things outside of what he talked about. There's lots and lots of questions that need to be answered. I've been fortunate to be a part of a lot of the focus groups that we've engaged in, and there's so many questions that folks have around safety and efficacy, long-term effects, vax effectiveness, how's this going to affect someone with comorbidities, for example. It's really critical that all those questions be answered, no matter when they're asked or how they're asked, and that they be answered with respect, right, and with cultural appropriateness. We're finding that hopeful and aspirational tone seems to be resonating a lot more with these groups than a fear-based approach, which I don't think is that unusual when it comes to public education campaigns. We are finding that there may be a need to acknowledge economic harm to a degree and talk about the fact that COVID has affected these communities in the way that it has. But this notion of protecting family and community is really working and resonating with folks. Because misinformation is so widespread and there's so much distrust, again, this is where we think that a lot of the specific messengers are going to come into play. Lots of conspiracy theories, lots of confusion because there's so many different public education efforts out in the community already around vaccines. Folks aren't sure about what to trust. And then there is real fear of being tricked. The role that historic racism is leading and the wait and see attitudes. We do have some healthcare providers who are viewed as trying to sell things. They're viewed as being a part of big pharma, especially if they're very foreign to a focus group and they're not a trusted entity already in their life. And then finally, when it does come to the messengers, I think what we do know for sure is that we'll be looking at a mix of grassroots messengers that are on the ground in these communities in very trusted ways. So those community leaders, in community centers, in nonprofits, in faith-based organizations will be go-tos for us, along with those trusted healthcare providers that exist in their lives already. So with that, I'm going to just stop sharing and turn things back over for the next presentation, and happy to answer questions when we get to that point.
Thank you so much, Taryn, for that really helpful and practical information and research. And we're going to close it out, our presentation section anyhow, with a presentation from Kate Emanuel at the Ad Council, where she's the Chief Strategy Officer, and she has more than 20 years experience in the nonprofit and public sectors with deep experience in strategic planning, policy analysis, and communications. And she'll talk about some of the work that they're doing nationally. So, Kate.
Unmute. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I mean, the two prior presentations were a great setup because it's so consistent what we also found with our campaign, which I'll talk about. So we're the Ad Council, we're a nonprofit, and we create campaigns working pro bono with ad agencies, digital agencies, and then the media, everything from billboards to Clear Channel to Pinterest to Twitter to broadcast cable, et cetera. And we're partnering on our campaign with the COVID Collaborative, which is a really great group that was created right when the pandemic hit. They felt like they needed a federal response to COVID. So it's a coalition of groups representing the governors, former FDA commissioners, academic institutions like Morehouse, Duke, you have the Skoll Foundation, and then kind of the ground game of ASTO, NACCHO, NAACP, UNIDOS, et cetera. So the Ad Council sort of is the air game, and the COVID Collaborative sort of the ground game for this effort. Of course, we did research, and we did this last December and November, and we did qualitative and quantitative research, really looking at vaccine hesitant individuals like Dr. Mensah talked about. We came in knowing no one size fits all. There's no one vaccine hesitant mindset. We knew we'd have to have tailored messages for different populations. We also brought in 3 different big kind of ad agencies to do the work. Joy Collective to the Black community, Alma to the Hispanic community, and Pierre Adele sort of to more general market, as well as conservatives. And we also work with all of our partners. What's neat about the Ad Council is we sort of get the pro bono resources of like an IBM Watson, Facebook, Ipsos, et cetera. So why are people hesitant? I feel like Dr. Mensah, our slide is the same one. It's concerns about safety and side effects, speed of the trials, especially in communities of color, distrust in the government, and just conspiracy theories as well play into hesitancy. We found this across all populations. I think the de Beaumont Foundation is on this call. They've also looked closely at conservatives. Same thing. It's really about safety and speed of these trials and distrust. Don't tell me what to do, et cetera. And so from the insights, we then tested some messages. And here's what resonated across audiences is that you really need to lead with empathy, acknowledges people's concerns, just lean into that hesitancy, that it's okay to have questions. What did not resonate really well is sort of, it's the right thing to do for your nation. Negativity and fear. Folks don't want to hear about how horrible the pandemic is. They know that. Don't want to hear about how we can get back to normal. For many, life will never be the same. They've lost loved ones. So also just want to be real careful in the words we used as well. But the overall strategic framework of our campaign, which launched about 3 weeks ago, is to lead with empathy, use emotional triggers. And what we mean by that is, there's also an element of there's moments missed that you want to get back to, and we all want to get back to, whether it's seeing your grandchild, senior elderly parents, having those family gatherings. Those did also test well as motivations. And then, what you just heard from Taryn is that, facts are key, but the messenger is just as critical. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. This is also, big call out to do Beaumont, even the consumer language we talk about. And we're happy to share these slides. I'll also mention we have a toolkit that has all this information. It's things like, don't say it was a vaccine developed quickly, but it's a safe and effective vaccine. Operation Warp Speed. Don't really need to mention that, but that it was authorized by the FDA based on clinical testing. So things like that, just like really good. Our words matter, obviously. We also really wanted to make sure our campaign tested well. And so we did a lot of message and creative vetting So we had an internal group from the COVID collaborative that looked at the message testing. And then in pre-production, we also shared it with these groups just to make sure that the tone, culturally relevant campaign was on target. And so, the big platform, it's called It's Up to You. This also resonated across all groups. And it's really tapping into do what's right for yourself and your family. The choice is to you, and to ask those questions. So when it's your turn, you'll have those answers and be ready to get the vaccine. So we're really priming the pump, because we know that not everyone has access to the vaccines right now, but that's kind of the idea behind the overall campaign. And now I'm just going to show a quick spot just so you can see the frame of you've got questions. That's okay.
As the COVID-19 vaccines become available, you might be asking yourself, should I get it? And if I do, will I be able to go about life without putting my family at risk? You've got questions, and that's normal. The fact is, the vaccines are safe and effective. They're going to save lives. To get the latest on the COVID-19 vaccines, visit getvaccineanswers.org, because getting back to the moments we miss starts with getting informed. It's up to you.
And these are just other campaign executions in print, outdoor, web banners, social graphics. We have a whole Spanish language. It wasn't simply translated, but based on insights we did with the Hispanic community. But we did feel that It's Up to You translated well to the Hispanic community. And then, the other, like I mentioned, one is really based on facts, answering those questions, and the other one is sort of those moments missed. So this is just an ad to the Black community.
COVID-19 has changed how we show up and show out with our family. Now it's time to take the first step that lets us get back to talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. Before we can safely come together, we need the facts. As COVID-19 vaccines become available, you may have questions. Should I get it? Is it safe?
Should I wait?
It's smart to question. Now, get the facts at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
And this is some of the other print and out of home for the Black community. And then the ads direct people to getvaccineanswers.org, which is in 7 different languages. It's a very simple site that's based on the top Q&As people are having. And so there's these cards, did the clinical trials include people like me? All vetted by the CDC. We also have healthcare experts like Dr. Fauci and diverse nurses and doctors talking into camera about why and how the vaccines are safe. So this is the campaign website. I should also note that most of this work is being co-branded with the CDC, and they're vetting all the messaging. So trusted messenger. So, I think Dr. Mensah said trust is the #1 thing. We couldn't agree more. Also the hyperlocal effort. So, what we found is that people want to hear more than anybody, and this is a really small slide, so you can see there, it's my doctor, my local doctor, right, or my healthcare provider. Word of mouth is also very compelling in that social proof that if my family got the shot or they're thinking about it, I'm more likely to. And, celebrities can be helpful, but they need to be really paired with that local doctor, pharmacist, or healthcare professional. What we're also told is don't just say doctors. It could be that nurse. It could be a home health aide at long-term care residency. So let's be very broad on how we talk about healthcare providers as well. And the way we're approaching this is we've got the facts we want to get out, medical experts, healthcare professionals, and there's folks that can amplify that. So we're working with social influencers, the celebrities, faith leaders, business community, and others to kind of amplify it. And now we're starting to add on to that folks that have gotten the shot, letting them talk about the social proof aspect of that, as well as in some of our influencer outreach. And we're working with a firm on the hyperlocal that can really drill down and get these messages into local communities. Separately, we're combating misinformation by working with Bully Pulpit, which is a firm that really works, you know, they work with the Biden campaign, where they'll take the most harmful narratives and working with Public Goods Project, which looks at misinformation online every day and saying, okay, what should we really be targeting right now? Where's the myths and misinformation? And then working with micro-influencers to kind of combat that misinformation. So the ground game is super important as well, right? So we have kind of three big chunks for that. That's community partnerships, diverse community outreach, and then our faith community engagement. So I mentioned toolkits. We launched these last week. There's 6 of them. We've got toolkits for the faith community, for the Black community, Hispanic community, and the business community. And what we do, we have our messaging recommendations. We have research that we did. We've got infographics. We've got downloadable flyers, email templates that are really to help the field just take the content and push it out into their local chapters. We know that community-based organizations are the most trusted messengers. We're not saying run our nice big ad. We're saying, here's what we learned about messaging, and here's some materials you can use in your own outreach. We're also working with these 3 big agencies to really go deeper into Hispanic and Black communities, working with different larger nonprofits like the Black Coalition Against COVID, NAACP, Unidos, to really spread the word and then do virtual events. So this is just a snapshot of the kind of groups we're working with. These are sort of the events we've done. You know, we just did one with a faith community. We did one with NAACP. I'm sure you've all been part of these kind of virtual events, but this is just another extension of getting the message out. This is just an example of the town hall we had with NAACP. I think we had 20,000 folks, many of them joined by phone. So it's also very important that you have that online option, but also many people phoned in. This is an event we had last Friday, about 10,000 folks joined. And then lastly, we have a big faith community component. So we created a fantastic National Faith Steering Committee of top African-American and Hispanic clergy. And they're really sort of our influencers, talking to their parishioners and networks to really, again, talk about vaccines, answer people's questions, pairing with local doctor in your church to talk about these, have events in your communities. And so we have this toolkit that has, you know, sermon and Bible study guides, educational videos, how do you even hold an event on COVID with your church? So just to make it really turnkey. And then this was an event we just had with blackdoctor.org, where, you know, we had Bishop T.D. Jakes, who's got 10 million followers. We had an award-winning gospel singer. And so, you know, we're just also just trying to constantly push out content as well. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it back for discussion.
Thank you, and thank all of you for your wonderful presentations. It is now time to open up for questions, and again, you can put your questions in the Q&A. We do have a couple of them already queued up, and so I will take those, but I also just want to start off in, you know, each of your presentations, I think showed some really good data and lessons learned, particularly for the Black and Hispanic community. And I'm wondering, what do we know about some of our other smaller communities of color, for those who are American Indian, Alaska Native, as well as Asian and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, about how they're faring in this time?
I think we have some data around that, don't we, Taryn? Excuse me.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we've had focus groups that get into both of those different communities, and we have a large Native population in the state of Colorado. What I will say about, I'll start with the Native communities. I think that what we're seeing, at least in the focus groups at this point, is there is actually a little bit less skepticism around getting the vaccine, but there's still questions, again, that need to be answered, right? There's still folks who are not necessarily going to be the first in line once they're eligible. And so there's a lot of the same practices that need to be utilized with some of these other communities of color. You know, they need to have trusted messengers that can answer all the questions that they have. There's lots and lots of similar questions that many of us have raised up around safety and efficacy, for example. I will say that I'm just thinking about the Native community focus group that featured women in particular. They seem to resonate a little bit more with healthcare providers in general. Maybe they don't have to be necessarily the most trusted healthcare provider in their life, but they want scientific facts and they want to hear that from, you know, a doctor or a nurse. And so that's something that that we're seeing and hearing there. And I think, you know, within the AAPI community, it's again very similar. The messengers are probably going to end up mattering the most in terms of making sure that, you know, the messages resonate, but really the person who's delivering that to them at the end of the day is probably the most efficient way that they're going to maybe move past that hesitancy phase and actually get vaccinated.
Thank you. I don't know, Kate, did you want to add anything or just?
Yeah, you know, for us, it's tough with Native American just because we rely on a donated media model. So I know that HHS is going to have a campaign and has hired G&G, which is a Native-owned agency, and will have a whole effort targeting Native American. I know they're also working on a toolkit. And then we've also had conversations with the Urban Indian Health Institute, and I know they have materials and have done research too. So happy to share with this group. We're eager to look at that too as well.
Thank you. And one of the questions that we received is related to some of the data that we saw. And so Dr. Mensah, in one of your slides, you showed that between December and March that we saw a drop in the percentage of the Hispanic population in particular that said they would be interested in planning to get the vaccine. And this is actually something for any of the panelists, but do we have a sense of what's going on there and why we saw that drop?
Yes, yeah, it's an important question. I think we have to be careful how we interpret that. The most we can say is that we know that a substantial proportion of the individuals who are hesitant really want to take a wait and see approach. So as now we have more than 1 million, maybe tens of millions of people who've gotten and have done well, that reassurance helps reduce the hesitancy rate. In addition, given the wonderful messaging that's been developed, what we just heard, I can see how a substantial proportion would be convinced and would change their mind and then accept. So we really have to be consistent as we begin to prove ourselves trustworthy, and as they realize that we are consistent, we provide compelling information, more and more people would change. So that's the unique aspect about the hesitancy group. It is not constant, it's changing. What we don't want to do is have them switch to, they're not going to take it because I think we have very good evidence that as we provide more information, emphasize trust, emphasize convenience, we should do better and better.
And Kara, excuse me, if I could also comment, some of the things we're hearing in community is more around that convenience piece. So even after they're past the hesitancy, the vaccine's not offered in a community where they feel safe.
Yeah.
It may be at a big parking lot somewhere where our undocumented neighbors feel uncomfortable going. And so there's also some structural barriers, I think, as well.
Thank you for that. And I think that that speaks to one of the other questions that I have in terms of, you know, so we're hearing that we're seeing improvements in some communities in terms of their willingness to take the vaccine, but I think we're hearing also about some of the access challenges and just those technologies. And so I guess I'm wondering, to what extent do you feel that, you know, sort of it's the message of hesitancy maybe crowding out some of the access challenges that we're having, and how people are addressing those, and any advice that you have on how we push forward with that? And I know we're getting more vaccines, so hopefully access will not be as much of an issue in terms of quantity, but the issues that Karen just mentioned in terms of where and how, I think might still be ones we need to address.
I can talk about that. Oh, go ahead, Kate.
Well, no, all I was going to say, and I defer to Dr. Mensah, who's probably closer to the supply issues, is that we've been very careful at the Ad Council because we don't want to label people as hesitant or any group as hesitant. We know it's very fluid. Dr. Reed Tuxton, the head of the Black Coalition Against COVID, always reminds everyone that it's a fluid, this idea about confidence or hesitancy is very fluid right now in communities of color. So we do not want to be labeling anyone. And so I think it's just a big watch out for us as we produce new content with influencers. You just, like everyone has said on this call, there's no one vaccine hesitant mindset, and it will change quickly too. So we have to be very, willing to pivot and talk differently about it. But yeah, I just would love to hear what others think too.
Our local providers who service the non-English speaking or primarily other language and English speaking population who provide a call-in reservation service have great high rates of vaccination than those who are relying on the digital system that is only in English.
Mm-hmm.
That's also part of the reason why I liked Kate's term of hyper-local. So the notion that maybe the national celebrity we haven't seen that at all. It's really more important to make it contextualized to the local environment and use local trusted sources and local trusted messengers, just as important as the message itself. Dr. James, the question you asked earlier is really a key one, because there's nothing worse than us spending the time convincing individuals who are hesitant, who now make up their mind that yes, they want to get the vaccine, and then face the frustration that the vaccine is not available. Kate, I wish we were as close to the supply side as we wanted to be. We're not that close, but it's extremely important. And one thing we've also found very, very useful is the concept of the social determinants. Where you place your vaccine delivery or access points makes a huge difference. If people have to drive there and they don't have a car, but public transportation doesn't go there, you're not going to make a huge difference. If you only operate during work hours on Monday to Friday, that doesn't help the mother or father who has 2-3 shifts and therefore can only be available in the evening and on weekends. So I think systematically going through all the different social and environmental barriers can make a huge difference. So we really want to couple messages around hesitancy with messages around access and convenience so that the two go together.
Thank you. Okay, I know we are running short on time, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to get 2 more questions in here. And the first one comes from John, who wants to know, given the comments about effective messaging, it sounds to me that the public health argument, this is for the greater public good, might not resonate. If this is true, doesn't this undermine support for public health? Do we feed the idea of individualism and selfishism? This has longer term implications for equity, as people with wealth and resources can more easily find ways to protect their individual needs.
I'd love to respond to that. I don't know if John's a funder, but as a funder, one of the things we continue to learn is that we have to unlearn much of what we've taken as as truth in talking to community. So on one hand, get people vaccinated is the goal. And so if we can still reach that goal, we're still supporting public health. Secondarily, when you come at it from the perspective of particularly communities of color that have long historical histories of oppression, their viewpoint is often, what has the system ever done for me? Why should I then support the system. I am willing, though, to keep myself safe, to keep my family safe. And so we have to recognize that and keep that in perspective. And things that may feel counterintuitive to us really are the ways to address community and respect how they think about it.
Thank you.
That's absolutely correct. And John, I would add that for most of these challenging and difficult questions, it's really not a yes or no response. It's not all of one and none of the other, but it's some middle ground. And depending on the context, you shift one way more or the other way more. The example of either using objective factual data versus emotional approach, in one context, one might work better than the other. So I would suggest we think of these as a framework that is also a little bit fluid depending on the context, taking culture in particular into account. It's rarely either extreme, and we probably do better thinking of the middle ground that encompasses both aspects.
Thank you. And our final question, which I think is looking to the future and all of the research that you guys have done, I'm going to blend a little bit of what I've received in sort of other questions. How do we build on this? So sustaining the partnerships and the infrastructure for the future. And I think also making sure that the lessons that we've learned through the work that you guys have been doing and others get built into our responses to things from the beginning. So how do we make sure that this work continues going forward?
I mean, Dr. James, I can jump in here, and I saw that question. I mean, I think one thing that was created is the Health Action Alliance that's come out of this. It's funded by RWJ, Du Beaumont, the CDC Foundation, Ad Council, and BRT. And right now, it's just to help engage employers on vaccine education. But part 2 and 3 is to really restore faith in our public health systems and get the business community to support it and address health equity. So I think that's one long-term goal of what's been created that's called the Health Action Alliance. Would be happy to forward more information about that, but I think that's one, because what we're hearing also is like, great, well, now you're talking to us about the vaccine, but what about the systemic, right? All the issues we got to fix, so.
Dr. James, I would add on to that by also highlighting continuing community engagement.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't just reach out to the community when there is an epidemic or a pandemic, and then once that's over, we forget. I think the continued engagement, there are challenges and disparities in diabetes, there are challenges and disparities in heart disease, sickle cell disease. So all these partnerships and excellent work you've done, if we make sure that we continue community engagement, recognizing the importance of trust, the importance of respect, and the importance of convenience when we think of the social determinants. That's what I think would create that path to a really bright future.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Taryn, Karen, George, and Kate for wonderful presentations. I also want to thank David Russo and our colleagues at the Kaiser Family Foundation who are providing all of us with the data that's helping to inform these conversations. And of course, to thank the Media Impact Funders for partnering with us and allowing us to collaborate on this event. I'm going to turn it back over to Vince, and who's going to close us out.
And indeed, Karen, right back at you. Thank you for moderating such an enlightening conversation with all these experts. Really wonderful to have for us to be able to join you in presenting this information, the expertise, the credibility and the reach of institutions like the National Institutes of Health and the Ad Council, as well as maybe a special thank you to our friends at Colorado Health Foundation for sharing the work, letting us get under the hood with them in the middle of the project when a lot of funders aren't always so comfortable sharing work when it's in process. So thank you, especially Karen and Taryn, for sharing a project in process. It's so important. It's so timely that we get this work shared while it's still relevant to our communities. I just want to point out that we're going to be joining I think Grantmakers in Health is part of the group of organizations presenting another program, related program on vaccine issues with United Philanthropy Forum on April 9th, I believe it is. Tune into either of our sites to learn more about that. And then next month, we're going to return for our Media Impact Forum programming on, in a more general way of looking at the importance of the broadest diversity of representation in science communications beyond vaccines, but to the full range of science issues. And so stay tuned for more information about that session too. Thank you all, and thank you all for participating as well.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.